may always be given to our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who has guided us until today. Welcome to this international forum on Maqasid Syariah, Maqasid Perspective on First Building today. To start our opening ceremony this morning, we would like to open this forum today with reciting Al-Fatiha together. Ameen. Thank you very much. Without further ado, I would like to invite Yang Berbahagia Dato Haji Rashid Hasnon, Deputy Chief Minister of Penang, to give an opening ceremony this morning. Cordially welcome.
Terima kasih pengacara majlis. Thank you. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahirabbil alamin, wassalatu wassalamu ala sayyidil mursalin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Subhanaka la ilma lana illa ma 'allamtana innaka antal alimul hakim, wa la hawla wa la quwwata illa billahil aliyyil azim. Yang berhormat Dato Abdul Malik Abu Kasim, Esko Kerajaan Negeri Pulau Pinang. Yang saya hormati Datuk Profesor Dr. Wan Salim, Mufti Kerajaan Negeri Pulau Pinang. Yang saya hormati Profesor Dr. Jasser Auda, the invited speaker for this event this morning. Dear audiences, Datuk-datuk, datin-datin, juga yang berbahagia wakil-wakil daripada Institut Penang, Dr. Mustafa, as well as Professor Dr. Ismail daripada Kitab, dan semua yang hadir pada pagi ini. Alhamdulillah, first of all, we feel the syukur to Allah Subhanahu Wa Taala for being able to be in this hall this morning with the objective of hearing a discussion in the topic of Maqasid Syariah, the Maqasid perspective on the First Nation building. Ladies and gentlemen, this forum, these lectures bring about when my office was approached by Maqasid Institute from Kuala Lumpur, whom represented by Brother Muhammad and also Brother Najmuddin, whereby upon what they have proposed, and it's something that we have talked and we have discussed about, where the understanding of, especially in the Islamic perspective with regard to Maqasid Syariah, can be the basis and principles of how we are governing our life, not only our life but beyond the management of the states as well as the management of this nation as a whole. As we know that Islam has been the official religion in our country, Malaysia, and we all know that Islam is a way of life, and it has been the approach and how the overall knowledge of Islam has been applied from since the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and how the ulama in the past has been using this understanding of Sharia, and what has been the benefiting the things that we can get from the principle of Maqasid Syariah. As you all know that it is probably on the surface that the Maqasid Syariah, the objective, the purpose of Syariah itself, it's in the preservation, for example, the preservation of a deen, a religion, preservation of this wealth, the preservation of akal, and also nasab. We have understood by ourselves from our knowledge of the Maqasid Syariah. So today we have an opportunity, whereby this brother Jasser Auda, whom, as probably some of us may know, that he is the descendant of the nephew of Abdul Qadir Auda, whom is a very great scholar during the Imam Hassan al-Banna is part of the Ikhwan Muslimun. Of course, I am not here to relate how being a descendant of Abdul Qadir Auda, we know that how his principle has been there, so we can have the opportunity to probably discuss this and how it can apply to our life, especially for the people in Malaysia. I was made to understand as well the Maqasid Institute of Maqasid Syariah in the part, in the objective in delivering knowledge of how Islam can be the option of managing not only nation but the whole country and this world. Our brother has had these offices, not only your base is in London and of course the rest of the world. So let's spend for the next couple of hours to have this discussion where we can explore further how, especially in the state of Penang, that we probably want to institute this institution of part of the knowledge building with regard to Sharia and the Maqasid of Sharia. Now we have had College Technology Kitab. It's the institution sanctioned by the state government, as we have earlier having a discussion. We have had not this subject directly, but there are also other institutions, university, some of the universities in Malaysia who has had this. Probably what is the outcome of this discussion? If we feel that this institution can be implemented in Penang, then let's do so. We have our ESCO, the Agama here, as well as the Mufti. And I do hope that the discussion today will be very fruitful to all of us. I'm sure some of you are professors. I know that I was with Professor Abdullah this morning from USM, and the rest of you are very interested in discussing this topic. And I do hope that at the end of the day we will still give option. There will be commentary from the various institutions, this Penang Institute, from Kitab as well as from Pejabat Mufti. So once again, ladies and gentlemen, let's this be the beginning of something that we can offer what Islam through the understanding of Maqasid Syariah be the best option on how we can actually have that good principle in managing our state and also our country. For fellow non-Muslim who are around here, where when we organize it, we do invite them to come here so that we have an open mind. Probably this could be one of the solutions of how we manage with the multiracial community that we have had in not only in Penang but overall in Malaysia. And Brother Jasser Auda, you will also be spending some of your time after this in Kuala Lumpur. He will be meeting some of the institutions in Kuala Lumpur with regard to this, imparting this understanding of this Maqasid Syariah. So in a nutshell, the bottom line of this the discussion or forum is how we can get the right understanding of meaning of Sharia and how does that benefit in all various aspects of our life. So with that note, I thank you for all your presence today and all your participation. And be open, and I'm sure there will be definitely some differences in opinion, And if you have something that you want to get clarification of, I'm sure our brothers and the rest of the speakers that we invite here would be able to give some knowledge on this. So terima kasih kepada semua kerana hadir pada pagi ini. Sekian, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh dan salam sejahtera.
Thank you very much, Yang Berhormat Dato Haji Rashid, for the opening ceremony today. Without further ado, we would like to invite our honorable speaker today, Professor Dr. Jasser Auda, to give us a speech on Maqasid Syariah and leadership. Cordially welcome.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Good morning, everybody. Sabah al-khair. It's really a pleasure to be here. It's my first time in Penang, not the first time in Malaysia, but first time in Penang, and I'm really happy with all I'm hearing. I work in knowledge and dialogue and so forth, and there is a lot of that happening here. I would like to start by thanking my dear brothers. Thank you very much, Dato. Thank you very much, Dr. Fadil Mufti, for inviting me and your hospitality and your welcome. It's a brotherhood, inshallah, that started in this trip, and inshallah will continue. A brotherhood of working for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for the sake of Islam. And thank you for those who are interested in these ideas. I'm very happy that the ideas of Maqasid Syariah are gaining more popularity and more ground in a place like Malaysia. Malaysia is a very important Islamic country in the sense of giving a face of Islam that is different from other places that give sometimes a face of Islam that is rigid, and sometimes a face of Islam that lives in a different history. Malaysia has the potential to give a face of Islam that is different from many other faces and very important. Islam, my brothers and sisters, is not only for Muslims. Islam is for everybody. And Muhammad ﷺ is not only for Muslims. Muhammad is for everybody. And the Quran is not only for Muslims. In fact, the Quran is for non-Muslims to read and understand. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent this Quran as a message to non-believers to learn about God, believe in Him, and so forth. For our non-Muslim friends who are here today, the Quran is not only for Muslims. In fact, it's in principle for you to read and learn about God and learn about Islam. And then when you believe in God, you read the Quran for guidance and for law and for a number of other things. But the principal message of the Quran is for humanity anyway. The issue of Maqasid Syariah, I think, is a very important step forward in the Islamic thinking and the Islamic thought. And I always like to discuss issues of Islamic thought and nation building and so on in minority settings, where Muslims are minorities. I think when Muslims are minorities, they are more open-minded to ideas of participation and collaboration and finding common ground. When Muslims are majority, and sometimes a weak majority, but majority numbers, they dream of an Islamic state, and they want to implement a government in a way that is a utopia that they think of, and sometimes they want to enforce their understanding of Islam on everybody. And being a majority, sometimes it is tempting to think like that, to think in terms of enforcing Islam on everybody. But when you're a minority, you're forced to be realistic, that you are living in a multicultural, multi-faith and multi-religious society. I just came from South Africa. I was giving some lectures there. And Muslims there being a minority. In fact, I lost my bags in Hong Kong. So with the help of Dato, I was able to buy this batik to be with you, because my clothes are still in Hong Kong. But I bought a batik actually from South Africa. Batiks are worn in South Africa after Nelson Mandela had decided to wear batiks towards the end of his life, in honor of Muslims in Cape Town, because Muslims in Cape Town, many of them are from Indonesian origin, like the Indonesian slaves that came and so forth. And Muslims, and this is part of the topic, this is not part of the joke, this is the topic. What Muslims did with the majority when there was an apartheid in South Africa is that they joined the anti-apartheid movement. Alhamdulillah, there were a number of ulama, a number of brothers and sisters in South Africa who took the strategic decision to go against the government of the apartheid and have a coalition with the anti-apartheid movement from the African community, from the Indian community, from all of the communities in South Africa, mostly Africans. Africans there are the majority, obviously, of the society. And when they made this decision to fight against the apartheid, and the apartheid ended, and Nelson Mandela became a president in '94, Nelson Mandela honored Muslims, even though they are a minority, maybe 5% of South Africa, by putting 8 ministers out of 25 in the first government in South Africa. 8 Muslim ministers out of 25 ministers, even though Muslims were 5% of the population. And that shows you, when Muslims are a minority, how they could have a very big influence on the rest of the country. A number of them eventually became governors and so on, and they had influenced South Africa and its politics and its identity and its laws, not as an Islamic state. It's not an Islamic state. The majority of people are non-Muslim, but a state that is not only friendly to Islam, but supportive of Islam and many of its causes. We're all aware, for example, of South Africa's stand on the Palestinian issue. Very, very strong stand. It's stronger than every Arab nation that I know today. Like much stronger than the nations that claim to be the representatives of Islam. The South African stand from the government there against the Palestinian issue is much stronger than the Egyptian stand and the Saudi stand and so forth. Why? Because of the influence of Muslims and the common ground between Muslims and non-Muslims, which Maqasid Syariah, I will explain, inshallah, briefly, could build. A common ground of understanding, of fighting for freedom, whatever freedom it is. They fought against apartheid, and now they are helping the causes of freedom everywhere, including in Palestine. So Nelson Mandela not only wore batiks, but he supported the Islamic causes, not just by his attire and wearing a batik, but also by creating laws and policies that were friendly to Muslims and their existence there. When we talk about Islam and the state, or how to build a nation, first of all, there is a difference between a nation and a state, because I know that we have nation states these days, so you have a state and you have a nation, but your alliance to a nation is not necessarily an alliance to a certain political system. I just want to make this as a principal point. But in any case, when you have a nation state, you're trying to build a nation so that the state is a healthy state, where people feel an alliance towards the state because it represents their nation. If you are building a nation, whether in Penang as a state or in Malaysia as a federation, there are different ideas where people are trying to resolve the question of the religious versus the secular, or the confessional versus the public. If you want to imagine those as two circles, maybe I could go into a classroom mode if you allow me. Excuse my my university kind of background, so it's easier to draw something than to speak about it. So if you imagine that we have two circles. We have two circles. The circle of religion and the circle of the state. Some people suggest that in order to build a modern state, you have to separate the circle of the religion from the circle of the state. This, they call it the private, and this, they call it the public, where religion has to do with the private, and the state, in the public sense, takes a rationality as a way of building policies and building nations and so on. So you make decisions on the state level based on rationality. And rationality is defined in that particular philosophy usually in economic terms. So you make decisions in the public that are best for the economy. And the private has to do with religion, Islam or any other religion, where the religion is in the church, in the mosque, in the temple, in the synagogue, and doesn't have anything to do with the public. This is a typical, if you wish, secular agenda, a secular opinion. And sometimes the secular opinion even makes the state antagonistic towards the religion. You know, the French model, for example, where the state is even trying to control the public spaces, so you don't even show that in a school or in a government building you're Muslim or you're Christian, you cannot wear hijab, you cannot wear a cross. So this is one secular model. And we have a different model in the Islamic thought of today that you can call, if you wish, the Islamist model. A model of the private and the public being one and the same. And therefore, everything that is Islamic is everything about the state and its laws and institution. In this model, some Islamist groups suggest that every sin in Islam has to be a crime in the state, and every obligation in Islam has to have an institution in the state to deal with, and laws. So you have laws for zakat, and laws for prayers, charity, and laws for everything that has to do with Islam will automatically become a public institution that the state, with monopoly over means of violence, is going to implement in the reality of the people. This model has a big problem because religion cannot be separated from the state. You cannot have a state that has no values. A state has values, even if you call it a secular state. Even if it's France or America or any of the models of secular states. I live in Canada, I'm Canadian. We have a secular state. in Canada. In fact, the Canadian Constitution says that we are a secular state. But there is so much that the state does in terms of religion in Canada. Religious education, there are institutions, there is a lot in the family law, even the Canadian secular family law, that came from religion, from Christianity, from other religions in terms of the kinds of marriages that are allowed, the kinds of... There is so much that has to do with religion when it comes to the state. So it's not really a secular state. And when politicians in the state speak, they speak about ethics that come from religion. They are not ethics that come from philosophy. They are religious people based on their religions and everything. So, and without religion, you really cannot have a proper democracy or a proper secular state, because without the inner motivation of the citizen, you're not going to be able to do everything with the law. The law has to have people who believe in it and have morals and have ethics. And ethics of societies mostly come from religion. Yes, I know that atheists have ethics in terms of their understanding of ethics, whatever that is. But most ethics in any civilized society comes from religion, Christianity, Islam, and so forth. Now, this model has a problem because this model is trying to enforce Islam through a state. And therefore, this model is a model not for an Islamic state. This is a model for dictatorship. Because if you are going to say that the state is going to make me pray and make me give charity and make me do everything in Islam, then you're giving the state too much power. First of all, the state will need a huge police and huge institutions for justice and so forth in order for somebody to say something un-Islamic in the street to be arrested or to do, and so forth. So this is a model of a very big state and a dictatorial state, a state that is really taking Islam in its hand. And this model leaves no room for what we call in modern terminology civil society. It leaves no room for the masjid, the mosque, to do some education, for the family, for the institutions. This model is putting religion in the state's hand, everything about religion, and it doesn't leave a private area, as they say in political science. Everything is public, everything is controlled by the state. The model that I think is the wasati, is the moderate, and is the right Islamic model, where Maqasid Syariah, as the title of the lecture says, could build a nation, is a model I wrote about in a couple of my books. The latest is called Civil State, الدولة المدنية نحو تجاوز الاستبداد وتحقيق مقاصد الشريعة. Civil state towards overcoming tyranny and the achievement of Maqasid Syariah. And it's under translation. Brother Muhammad Suhaim, Jazakallah khair, he told me that it should come out soon in Malaysia, in the Malay language. Now, in this book, I suggested that the Islamic model is neither this model nor this model. And in fact, I suggested that we need to go post the Islamist model and post the secularist model. Because secular societies cannot sustain this model, and the societies that claim to apply Islam in an Islamist agenda cannot sustain this model. So I suggested a model in which you have two circles. The circle of the private and the circle of the public. And there's an area of intersection where you have three different domains. You have domain number one, which is the domain of religion, or domain of worship, domain of rituals, a domain where people worship according to their religious convictions. And the state has nothing to do with that part. This is a part where people go to the mosque or build a church, and they practice their religion and their rituals in a free way. Then another part, which is the part of the public, or the part, if you wish, of the state, in which policies are put based on ethics, based on a common ground of values of the society. That common ground, the Muslim comes to through Maqasid Syariah. One common ground, very important, is justice, which is one of the maqasid of the Sharia. When we teach about that, we teach al-adl as a maqsad of the Sharia, an objective of the Sharia. So I come to this policy area of the state, this area number 3, to issues of justice from an Islamic perspective. And somebody else comes to issues of justice from a secular perspective, or from a Christian perspective, or from any other perspective. Now, is Islamic justice different from Christian justice or Buddhist justice? Yes and no. In principle, no. Justice is justice. I mean, there are issues of, for example, bridging the gap between the rich and the poor. This is an issue of justice that we could agree on. There are issues of justice that are common to humanity that we can. The issue of politics here has to do with the common good, the public order. The common good, in the Sharia language, we call it al-maslaha al-amma. So I come to the common good from a Sharia perspective, and I believe that building roads and institutions and schools and public health and environment and all of that, from the Sharia perspective, is about maslaha, is about the common good. Somebody else believes in the same thing, the environment and public health and roads and so forth, from a common good perspective that is based on a different background. We might differ in some details, but we come to a common ground when it comes to the state and its policies. So these policies would be based on values, would be based on the protection of public order in general. Now, there is an area here, which is the area of the intersection between religion and the public. This is the area that requires some details, because this is the problematic area in the Islamic thought that needs analysis and needs us to think about very well. We are not going to differ with others about our freedom to worship and all of that, and others to worship. In Islam, we have in the Quran freedom for people to worship. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for example, is saying in the Quran that Allah has an objective for people to have a cycle of power, cycles of authority, so that the mosques and the synagogues and the churches and all that are protected. In Islam, we have a moral obligation to protect places of worship. We're not supposed to attack any place of worship, whether we believe in that place as a mosque, or we don't believe, as a church or a synagogue or a temple, and so forth. So, in this case, the religion is protected, and this is clear. And here, you could say that this is clear as well. The public order and the public good. Yes, we can talk more about philosophy, especially the economic philosophy behind the policies that have to do with the public. And this is a very important area, because so far the Islamic thought is capitalist when it comes to economics. But we can talk about this, that's a different story. But this area is where there is an intersection between religion and the public. And this area we could divide, in that humble research of mine, I divided them into 3 different areas. An area of what I call parallel legislation, which means that every religion in this area practices its own rules, its own ahkam. For example, family law. You can have parallel family laws in this area, where Muslims marry according to a certain law, and others marry according to another law. The area of parallel legislation is not new to the Islamic understanding. وَكَيْفَ يُحَكِّمُونَكَ وَعِنْدَهُمُ التَّوْرَاةُ فِيهَا حُكْمُ اللَّهِ. Allah is saying in the Quran that the people of the Torah at the time of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they could go by the Torah. I mean, so the issue of Muslims going by the Quran and Jews going by the Torah is not new to the Islamic thinking. And therefore, if we have an area of the intersection between the private and the public, let's say the family area is very clear here, then we have a parallel legislation area, and then we can resolve this conflict. We are not going to force non-Muslims to marry and divorce and have inheritance according to Islam, and non-Muslims are not going to force Muslims to have a different code of the personal law. Now, there is another area that's called the area of consensus, I call it, which means that there is a consensus, there is an ijma', there is a public consensus on something that comes from religion, but it becomes law and it becomes a state institution. So let's say public morality. Here in Malaysia, there is a certain moral code. I'm noticing as I walk in the streets, Muslim, non-Muslim, people behave in a certain way. It's different from places in Europe where I see people, for example, naked in the street. This is not something that you don't see in Malaysia. Not from Muslim and not from non-Muslim. You see, there is area of consensus on public morality and on other areas where you will not, they come from religion, but they find their way to the law in a way that makes a consensus in the society. Then there is an area that is the area of difference. And this is now the sensitive area here. The other parts we could build a nation based on. We could build a nation based on respecting the private and the worship, based on making policies based on rationality and values and all of that. We could, difference of philosophy, like details, but building policy for the sake of the common good. And we could agree that between religion and the state, there is area of parallel legislation, and there is an area of consensus on public morality issues. There is an area of difference here, which means that something in the religion, now we're talking about Islam, is supposed to be part of the public institution and the laws and all of that, but there is no consensus in the society. What comes to mind right away is the area of hudud, for example, the area of the punishments in the Sharia that have to do with certain crimes. These punishments are part of the Sharia. I mean, if I say they are not part of the Sharia, I'm not an Islamic scholar. I mean, this is in the Quran. The Quran is talking about the hudud. But would the hudud be part of this or this? This is the question. Are we going to consider it to be part of the policies of the state, or we're going to consider it to be part of the private convictions, but not being a policy of the state? Actually, this area of difference is flexible. This area of difference here is supposed to be open for what you could call in modern terms civil society. And what I mean by that is that if we believe that it is fair for a murderer to have a capital punishment, this is hadd al-qatl, what we call in the Sharia the hadd al-qatl, or the punishment for a murderer, capital punishment. Do you have capital punishment here in Malaysia? So here is, so we move that from an area of difference to an area of consensus. So what we can do as Muslims in order to be part of a nation is that if we believe in something that is Islamic, we try to convince the rest of the society. We cannot force it on the rest of the society. The rest of the society, and I would venture to say, whether we are a minority or a majority, even an 80% majority of Muslims. I grew up in Egypt, we were 90% majority of Muslims. You cannot really force the 10% Christians on certain things in Egypt because they are 10% and they have economic power and they have part of the history of that country. And it doesn't come like that. You cannot, as a 90%, say, because I'm a majority, 50 plus 1, I'm going to enforce a certain law on 10% of the society. That it doesn't work. They will start to form coalitions with international powers and they will separate, as what happened in southern Sudan. Southern Sudan now is a different country because of a policy like that, by saying, well, Sudan is an Islamic country and we are a majority, we're going to force on the minority in the south everything that is Islamic. So at some point in the south, the majority was Christian, but they forced women to wear hijab and they applied the hudud on Muslims and non-Muslims, and they did certain things. And people in the south didn't think that it's a good idea to be part of the north. So they allied with the west and so forth, and they separated. And it's fair enough, because this is not fair. If their Sharia doesn't say that they have to cover in a certain way, we cannot force that by the state. This is bad governance. You see, I believe, of course, in Islam, and as a scholar, I'm asked fatwa, the hijab is fard. Yes, it is fard. It is an obligation. But is it an obligation that the state enforces? That's a different question. Because, as I said, not every sin in Islam is a crime. If we equate sins and crimes, it becomes very problematic, right? And we eliminate the role of the civil society. So when we talk about the areas of difference, we believe that intoxicants are haram, alcohol is haram. That's fine. We can convince the rest of the society. And if the rest of the society agrees that we criminalize alcohol, we criminalize alcohol. But if the rest of the society doesn't agree to criminalize alcohol, the overwhelming society, it will never be criminalized, because you really cannot force it on people. This is not how the Sharia works. You cannot force. But what you can do, you can create an area of consensus. You can say that, well, alcohol is not criminalized, but it is criminalized in public, for example. Or it's criminalized for a person to be drunk in the street, or to drink and drive. And to look for areas of consensus in order to build a nation, to build a consensus. Why are we doing this? We're not doing this to please anybody from the Islamic perspective. We're doing this because it is an objective to have a peaceful state and to have a consensus of the people over matters of politics. We were just at breakfast with Dato. We were discussing the Medina constitution of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he came to Medina, he made this constitution or scroll with the Jews of Medina. And when you read it, it's very interesting. It says, Al-Muslimuna wal-Yahud ummatun wahida. Muslims and Jews in Medina are one ummah. Even the word ummah is used. Because this is a matter of siyasat, it's a matter of politics. And in issues of politics, yes, Muslims and non-Muslims could make one ummah, could make one nation. And that is different from other constitutions and other nations that Islam built after. Is there one model of nations in Islam? No, there are many models. But this model, I believe, is very suitable for a multicultural, multi-religious society, where we respect people's rights to worship and rituals and so on, and to build a religious institution. And we respect that policies are going to be based on values and based on issues like public order, issues of consensus, values, principles, not based on rules, but based on principles. And then we respect that there is an area here that is at the intersection between religion and policy, something in Islam that becomes a policy. If we divide it into an area of consensus and an area of difference, whether the consensus is parallel legislation or the area of difference where the civil society tries to move us from the area of difference to the area of consensus. We can take the society from believing that alcohol is a good thing to believing that alcohol is not good for you. And we have examples of non-Muslim majorities who banned alcohol at some point. It was banned in America at some point. There was a law banning alcohol from America. And it worked, but I mean, the society changed. You cannot really force it on them, especially if you are a minority, or even if you are a majority. How can you force this? You're going to, police everybody and spy on people, and you're going to have to cross certain lines that are un-Islamic, because in Islam we don't spy on people when they close their doors. As you know, in the Sharia, you don't spy whether they drink or not. You can't really control that. But for example, there is a consensus over the prohibition of drugs, for example. Yes, then we can agree on the rest of the society. And it's also Islamic, and it's also part of the Islamic Sharia too. Through our work in civil society and education and mosques and family and so on, we can move the society to have a consensus over what we believe is the right Islamic way. But I think we should respect that the society will never accept certain things. Partly, like for example, part of the hudud that has to do with cutting a thief's hand or the other. If the society doesn't accept it, we really cannot enforce it on people, even if we are 90%, because at the end, the 10% has a right in the nation we are building. We are talking about a nation state. We are not really talking about a khilafah. If it is a khilafah, then it's a different story, but nobody is claiming to be a khalifa today, except for, in Morocco, but that's, calls himself Amir al-Mu'mineen, but he doesn't say that he is Khalifa or anything. You see, but nobody is claiming to be a Khalifa really today. And yeah, the Amir al-Mu'mineen, the other guy in Daesh, but that's not an Amir al-Mu'mineen. That's different. So nobody is claiming really to be a Khalifa today. This is not what's happening, right? And therefore, when we talk about a modern state and we try to employ Maqasid Syariah, and this is what the time will allow me. Otherwise, I would have gotten with you through details of Maqasid Syariah and how it could inform policy and issues of justice, and especially maslaha, hifz al-din wa nafs wal-aql, as our brother has mentioned, the preservation of mind and intellect and family and wealth and faith and all of that, and the implication of that and the prioritization. And it's a whole thing. Like when we teach Maqasid Syariah and policy, we teach this in a 30-hour course. It's a long course with many details. But this is a general framework that I thought, if you allow me to put here on the board for our seminar to discuss, so that we think of not just Penang, where Muslims, I heard, are a minority. We think about modern nation states, where Muslims are majorities, but they have to come to a certain common ground with the rest of the society. They cannot be fighting the rest of the society over issues of areas of difference and then leave the society out from issues of policy, and therefore it becomes a divided society. And a divided society in a country like Malaysia is very dangerous for that country, because as I mentioned, it's a very important country from the Islamic point of view, and it has to continue to guard Islam. It cannot be just revolving around small issues. Every time I come to Malaysia, I hear questions about issues that to me are very surprising. Why would a great country like Malaysia be busy with something like the language that you write the word God with in the Bible? Or, like, why is this an issue? Like, subhanAllah, but anyway, you never know. Or like sometimes very, very small issues. And you have a very important country economically and so forth that has to take a role for Islam, and not being busy, or sometimes, like, what was that again? How sisters can sit on a motorcycle, that was Indonesia. Like what is this? Like, these are very tiny issues that are no issues really. Like, what is this? Now this is the Islamic discourse. The Islamic society is busy whether a sister should sit to the front or to the side on a motorcycle, and we're leaving the disbelievers rule the world and butcher Muslims in Syria and butcher Muslims everywhere, even here in Burma, close by, across the border. We're leaving Muslims to be butchered, and we're busy with how to sit on a motorcycle, or what language, Ya Allah, Dieu, God. What is this? I mean, it's very strange. So when we look at a wider picture, then we put the Islamic question in the right perspective. The Islamic questions of policy and the Islamic questions of rights and so on, and we build societies where non-Muslims are there, but are a minority that helps the Islamic cause, helps the bigger Islamic cause by helping the economy and helping the vibrancy of the society. And when you have a vibrant society in a country like Malaysia, believe me, you are doing Islam itself a very big service. Because Islam needs strong countries, countries that could propagate the Islamic values and give a model. I live in the West and I'm asked all the time, okay, you are saying very nice things, but do you have any model to show us? Obviously, they look in the Arab world, they don't see that model.
Malaysia.
Malaysia. I wish I could say Malaysia. I wish I could say that. To offer a good model, it's very important because I'm Arab. You know, the Arabs are not offering any model these days. You know, they are not. They are offering models of dictatorship and narrow-mindedness, and they are not models. They are not models. And I can't tell them, okay, you know, go to the Arab world and see the models of Islam. No, they are not. I'm doing Islam a disfavor. So you need to focus on Maqasid Syariah in order to build an Islamic model for a modern nation state, so that as Malaysia you could offer a model for the world, a model for Islam. You will not be able to implement everything that you dream of about Islam, but this is the reality of today's world. The more you take the rules from area C to area B, the more you convince the society with the soundness, because everything in Islam makes sense. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made intoxicants haram, when He made zina haram, when He made all of this, it makes sense. And there is a wisdom, right? But then we have to teach the society that adultery is haram, and then we can legalize it. But you really cannot enforce it on people if the majority of people are not really with you. And it doesn't mean that we are democratizing Islam, we're democratizing governance. There's a difference between Islam and governance. The difference between, again, the sin and the crime. The sin is a sin, but to make it a crime, you have to have a supportive society. You cannot force it on the society with the sword. It doesn't work like that. You will create, especially that we Muslims are weak economically and militarily, and we're not united, and we're divided into all of these funny countries. With all due respect to all your national feelings, we have these funny countries in the Arab world, Jordan, Libya, and Republic of Egypt, and these borders that colonization had created in the Arab world that we never knew before. There was no country called Saudi Arabia or Jordan or Qatar or any of that in our history. But now we are divided, and as the British say, divide and conquer, right? So in order for us to unite, we have to come to a common model of governance with Islam. That was part of the points I made in that book, that in order to overcome tyranny, most of these systems are tyrannical systems, istibdad, yani Fir'aun in a new way, not only in Egypt, everywhere, in a new way. So in order to come this Fir'auniyah, we have to build a civil model, what I call the book civil state, where it is post-secular and post-Islamist. I come from an Islamist background, obviously, but we have to move beyond the traditional Islamist imagination of the state in order to have a functioning state. And we really cannot swing to a secular imagination of the state, because this is not Islamic. We have to move beyond that to a common ground between Islamism and secularism, and perhaps the West could learn from us too. They are looking, I attended a seminar in Rome a few months ago that was called post-secular societies. Like even in places like Italy and so on, they are thinking of moving beyond secularism, because they realize that secular societies is not enough. They need religion, but how can religion play a role in the public space? This is also a model that I presented there for a society, a total different audience of non-Muslim Italian people in the University of Rome. And I think I found a common ground between Muslims and non-Muslims when it comes to this model based on Maqasid Syariah. Again, thank you very much for inviting me, and I hope this lecture was not very heavy. I noticed many of you are students, so I thought, well, let me do a professor thing and give you a lecture on the board. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for Professor Dr. Jasser Auda for a great speech and a very informative that talk about the Maqasid on leadership and leadership. Hopefully, our guests can get some information and ideas about the Maqasid and leadership. Okay, we have around 10 minutes break before we start to next session for the forum. Alright, so we have 10 minutes break. So we have some teas and also coffees over there, so we can have a break.